Nice meeting you.
Good afternoon.
Hi, Sabine. Hi, Peter.
Hello,
Hi,
hi.
Lavia. Hi, all.
All right. Hello, we're set to start, shall
Yeah.
we? We have everybody already in. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to our webinar on strengthening social protection priorities in post-war Lebanon. I'd like to welcome our two speakers and moderator, Giulio Bordon from the ILO, International Labor Organizations. Welcome. And of course, our long-lasting partner, Peter Ranyo from UNICEF. And our moderator, Sabine Hatem, the Chief Economist and Director of Partnership and Cooperation at the Institute of Finance. Allow me, Giulio and Peter and Sabine, to just go like 2 minutes in Arabic to introduce also a few words. أهلا وسهلا بالجميع في الويبينار حول تعزيز الحماية الاجتماعية الأولويات في لبنان ما بعد العدوان. اسمي لميا مبيض بساط، أنا رئيسة معهد باسل فليحان المالي والاقتصادي، وكتير بيسعدني أنه تكونوا معنا اليوم تقريبا آخر السنة، حيث قررنا أنه نطلع بعد فترة الحرب بالأولوية على تعزيز الحماية الاجتماعية، لأنه مثل ما بتعرفوا وكما وصفته منظمة العمل الدولية، نظام الحماية الاجتماعية بلبنان مجزأ، رجعي، غير متكافئ. وبالعام 2019 بنص كورونا، حيث تحتاج العالم لحماية اجتماعية، لم يتمكن حوالي 25% من المواطنين اللبنانيين من الوصول إلى أي نوع حماية من أي نوع كانت. على الرغم من أنه إذا مطلعنا على استهلاك النظام الحماية الاجتماعية من الناتج المحلي الإجمالي، بنلاحظ أنه الرقم اللي هو 6% ليس بقليل، 22% من النفقات ليس بقليل أبداً. لكن المشكل هي عم بتكون أنه قلة محظوظة هي التي تستفيد بشكل رئيسي من النظام، بينما يبقى الباقون خارج المشهد. هلأ طبعا لبنان في أزمات معقدة ومتلاحقة، ومن المرجح أن تكون هالتفاوتات رح تتفاقم، خاصة ما بعد العدوان الإسرائيلي، وطبعا رح يكون في نسبة السكان غير المحميين رح تزيد. لذلك في ضوء تضاؤل الموارد المخصصة للحماية الاجتماعية، وفي ظل الاضطرابات الاقتصادية اللي رح تنتج عن الحرب الأخيرة، عنا قلق من تفاقم عدم المساواة، عنا قلق من عدم تنفيذ تدابير مالية عامة بتقدر ترجع نظام الحماية الاجتماعية على أولويات الحكومة. نتأمل أن لا يكون هناك تدابير إضافية ممكن، مثل إلغاء الدعم، مثل خفض قيمة المعاشات التقاعدية، مثل يعني انهيارات تانية ممكن تكون أسوأ من اللي مرقت. ردا على كل ذلك، نحن نعرف أنه بذلت الحكومة بعض الجهود للتخفيف من المصاعب، ولكن برامج التحويلات النقدية بعدها محدودة، وحتى يعني الوصول إلى نظام شامل للحماية الاجتماعية اللي هو هدفنا بالأساس، اللي هو بنسميه minimum social protection floor، بعدنا حاسين أنه لا زال بعيدا. رح أتوقف هون واترك الكلام طبعا للمودريتور ولا المداخلين اللي رح يفوتوا أكثر معكم بالتفاصيل، وإن شاء الله بيكون كمان وقت لتلقي أسئلتكم. لكن بس حبيت هيك بعرفكم عن الجهد الكبير اللي عم بيقوموا معهد باسل فليحان مع شركاء ومنظمة العمل الدولية ومنظمة يونيسف للإضاءة على هالموضوع، وخصوصا على أكلافه المالية. وسبيل سابين حاتم، السيدة سابين حاتم اللي هي كبيرة الاقتصاديين بالمعهد، عم يتركز عملها اليوم على إصلاحات مالية العامة أكيد، بس بشكل خاص عم تطلع على مع فريق عمل على موضوع الحماية الاجتماعية وتمويلها. سابين متخرجة بالاقتصاد، وهي عم تشتغل متخصصة بالإصلاحات المرتبطة بالموازنة العامة والشفافية المالية. ويمكن بعض منكم تعرفوا على شغلها، تعرفوا على الشغل اللي كتير حلو انعمل بمواضيع البيانات المفتوحة، بمواضيع الدراسات القطاعية المرتبطة بمراجعة الإنفاق، ومنها الإنفاق على الحماية الاجتماعية، ومنها كمان الإنفاق على إدارة الاستثمارات العامة. بترك لك الكلام سابين، وأتطلع إلى نقاش أكيد رح يكون من النقاشات المهمة جدا في نهاية هذا العام على أعقاب يعني فترة صعبة سنخوضها كلنا. تفضلي.
شكرا لميا. Thank you. رح انتقل بس على اللغة الإنجليزية كرمال السبيكرز. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today to discuss the topic of very much importance for Lebanon, of course, because it will probably shape the future of what Lebanon will be and what Lebanon would be offering its people in the future. I'm very happy to have today with us two experts in the field. They bring a wealth of know-how on issues of social protection because they have an experience in the field and because they worked in many countries before coming to Lebanon. So I'm sure and I know that they bring a lot of perspective to the issues that we'll be discussing today. I'm also very happy to have them here because both of them are part of institution that are partner institution to the institute and with whom we're very happy to be collaborating on issues of social policy. Allow me please to present them to you. We have with us today Peter Ranyo. Peter is the Chief of Social Policy at UNICEF. He's a socioeconomist specializing in social protection and social policy with a lot of experience in policy research, analysis, and evidence-based advocacy. Before coming to Lebanon, he served as UNICEF's Chief of Social Policy in Egypt and as the social protection team leader in Ghana. And prior to UNICEF, he worked with a lot of organizations like the GIZ, UNDP, IOM, and IFRC on poverty reduction, cash programming, and social protection. He lived and worked across the Middle East, Africa, Asia, and Latin America, always working on issues related to social protection. Good afternoon, Peter, and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Sabine. A pleasure.
Our second panelist is Giulio Bordon. He's the technical officer in social protection at the International Labour Organization in Beirut. He's a labor and quantitative sociologist. Also, prior to coming to Beirut, Giulio worked on the extension of social security, on labor formalization strategies, and on the improvement of social protection governance and delivery for the ILO in Cambodia. He also worked as an academic researcher for the United Nations University, the Maastricht School of Governance, and as a consultant for the ILO in Trinidad and Tobago, Thailand, Mongolia, and for UNICEF in Montenegro. Hi, Giulio, and also thank you for being with us today.
Good afternoon, Sabine, everybody. Thanks for hosting me.
I will Lamia said a little bit just the background of she just introduced let's say she summarized what are the challenges, let's say, of the social protection system today in Lebanon. But I think that today we will go further maybe into the latest development and the way forward on the short and medium term. So I'll start with my first question to Peter. We're just coming out of a very difficult situation with the ceasefire that was acted only two weeks ago. Unfortunately, with the war we've been through, we've witnessed more than 1 million people being internally displaced in a very, very short lapse of time. UNICEF was at the forefront of the emergency response. So I wanted to ask you if you can let us know a little bit what was done in the area of social protection during this period in particular. How effective do you think this was? And what are the lessons that we can draw from the response that UNICEF gave and this experience to make our social protection system more responsive to shock? Because unfortunately, Lebanon is a country in which conflicts and shocks are recurrent. So if you can let us know a little bit your thoughts on this.
Again, thanks, Sabine. Thanks, Lamia, for having me in this webinar. Before I start answering, I think in every opportunity I have always, I remind people that Lebanon has now a social protection strategy that they didn't have a year ago. And this should be a document that all of us, all the practitioners in this area should read, should know very well, because in theory, it's supposed to guide all our work. So this is just a point I make in every before I start any presentation. Now on your question, I mean there are basically 3 points, three questions you're asking. What were the social protection measures that the government implemented? Were they working, and what we learned? So let me start with a short answer, and then I can elaborate more. So there were lots of intervention by the government. Was it enough? Absolutely not. Did it help people? It did help people that received such benefits, but clearly not everyone that was in need received it. And in terms of lesson learned, there's quite a lot of, in my opinion, positive learning from this response, but also from the response in late 2023. Now, I'm going to just focus on I mean, UNICEF has been responding to the crisis in many ways, delivering blankets, hygiene kits, water, and so on. But I'm going to just focus on the cash assistance part, so not the overall social protection, but just focusing on that. And the response, and also focusing on what UNICEF and ILO. So I'm going to try, every time I say UNICEF, it's also ILO, because this whole response on cash has been done jointly, basically every step. So we have the first important principle that we designed together with Mosaic response that was based on the key institution of the social protection system. Especially the NDA, so the National Disability Allowance, and the Rights and Access Center, which is the Rights and Access Center program, which is a program within MOSA, has been there for more than 30 years, that deals with the disability issues and has a database of persons with disability. So these were the pillar of our response. Now, we also, in a way, limited our cash response, focusing on people with disability. It's for many reasons, because we have been working on disability and social protection for a while, so we have carved our niche in this area, because it's complementary to many other interventions, to many other poverty targeted. So there's not really an issue about deduplication or overlapping of beneficiary, because a family with a person with disability has faces additional barriers. So there is a clear complementarity. It makes it easy also to implement it with limited, let's say, coordination across other stakeholders. So what we did, and I'm going to focus now on the response on the escalation phase. Together with MOSA, in the days after the escalation, we agreed to advance all payments, all the regular payments for the NDA beneficiaries. So the regular $40 amount that they're receiving was anticipated of 2 weeks. We're talking about the 2nd of October already. Everyone in the country received the NDA payment. We also agreed to provide a top-up of $100 to all families with a person with disability within the age group of the NDA, which is 15 to 30, 15 to 30, but from the affected areas. At the time, it was three governorates, two in the south and one in the east. With this top-up, which started only for the Lebanese, but then incorporated also the non-Lebanese group, we reached about, I believe, 10,000 families total, which corresponds to approximately 45,000 individuals that were benefited. This was a family grant. We know from research that in case of emergency, that any top-up that is provided to families is used, yes, for the member that it's targeted for, but benefits, about 50-60% benefits the whole family, because this money are fungible. Now, there was also this other idea that I mean, I'm very proud, and I guess our colleagues from ILO are also very proud that we were able to implement just a couple of weeks ago, which is a larger emergency transfer for all families with a person with disability across Lebanon. Here we are talking about between 40 and 45,000 families, so approximately almost 200,000 individuals benefiting from this cash. It was not as quick as it wasn't that easy to implement as we did it for the NDA top-up and the advance of the risk of the benefits, because we already had the data at the time. We had to go through a pretty large verification and validation of all the database in the Rights and Access Center, which is almost there, has almost been completed. Payments have already started about 10 days ago to children, so all families with children below 15, so not part of the NDA, plus an additional top-up for NDA families as well. And we are now processing a payment from 30, well, 64 and above, and then 30. So the total number will be 45,000 family. The most important thing about this response, it's government-led, and it's with its own money. And this is the first time that government is using its own money, allocated in the budget. We are talking about 4.5/5 million for the 2024 budget, into a cash and an emergency response. And this is very positive, because it sets a tone for what's coming next. It gives a message also to donors about the seriousness of the government in taking care of the most vulnerable families in the country. There are a few other steps, a few other measures that are planned, but we are going to start in January. There's going to be a temporary expansion of the NDA to children below 15. So for at least 6 months, I mean, we think it's going to be a bit longer than 6 months. We actually think 8 months. Children below 15 that are not part of the NDA, because the NDA group right now is 15 to 30, will receive the regular benefits. And the government has also announced an expansion of the NDA for 30, for person with disability 30 and above, using its own resources from the 2025 budget. So as you can see, lots of things have happened. And here I only mentioned what we, UNICEF and ILO, has been doing with MOSA. There are also other interventions, such as the horizontal expansion of the NPTP. There was a Chinese grant that went through also MOSA to support about 11,000 families. So there have been quite a few measures. Now, as I mentioned when I started with, was this enough? Absolutely not. I mean, we know the needs were huge and are still huge. So there was a pretty big coverage gap in the response. Then the other points that the other question was did it really help families? I mean, we know that it did for those that received the cash. We talked to a lot of people during our field visit, but we also had a survey about through WhatsApp for 3,000 beneficiaries of the emergency cash, and they responded on how they use the money, what how it really changed their life. And at the same time, they said, "But this is not enough," and we knew it. We knew it. Our ideal plan was to have a multiple top-up or multiple emergency transfer, but unfortunately, there aren't money available. Now, on the learning, so we learned in implementing these initiatives, we learned a lot from the phase one, from the October, November 2023, where we also advanced the NDA. We also managed to do a top-up for NDA beneficiaries, but it took us 2 months. Here, it was done in less than 8 days because we were prepared. We were prepared, and also the government accepted the idea. In 2023, we had to really discuss with them and explain the benefits, the pros and cons. It took quite a while, but now in 8 days, we were able to deliver cash to family. What we've learned and is that things are changing in how government view their role in supporting families with the most vulnerable family in the country. The fact that there are allocation from the budget, well, the allocation and utilization of resources, because that's, unfortunately, we know that what is allocated in the budget does not necessarily translate into money transferred to ministries to implement the program. So to me, this signals a learning within the ministries, and even beyond the ministry, which is MOSA, but also the government, probably they are understanding that there is a need to build a social contract where social protection and welfare has a central role into this process. And then more on the more negative side, we learned that well, donors did not contribute as much as they could have. There was very limited support. We have started seeing now some resources, some new resources being allocated. All the other programs, I mean, what we as UNICEF and others have done, we have taken bits and pieces from internal resources and from other programs which were already allocated to us. And that really limited the scale of the response and addressing, the needs of the huge needs of these families. And I'm going to stop here because I think I already spent quite a lot of time in this answer.
No, thank you for this overview. I don't think a lot were very much aware, at least of the support that was brought to families, people with disabilities and their families, which are really a group. I mean, let's say in the population that are really the most vulnerable because they were not, very much protected, let's say. So no, thank you for this overview. I'm sure we'll come back to a lot of what you've said in the questions, but I'll move to my second question for Giulio. We talked a little bit about what happened during the war, but unfortunately, challenges in Lebanon do not only stem from the war. However, and Peter mentioned that in early 2024, the government had launched the new national social protection strategy, and a little bit before that, Parliament had passed a very long-awaited pension law. We've been through a lot since then, but I mean, how would you assess the progress achieved on both fronts, on the national strategy and on the pension law? Were we able to advance a little bit on that, given the situation in the countries? And what would be the priorities, let's say, over the short term, if you really want to focus on these two very important milestones?
Thanks, Sabine. Thanks for the question. And thanks for everybody participating today in so many great numbers. And yes, as Peter mentioned earlier in the webinar, the National Social Protection strategy has represented a groundbreaking milestone for Lebanon, despite the juncture and the multiple crises that an emergency is occurring. The strategy introduces a vision which is coherent and unified for the social protection system overall, and marks indeed a shift from a fragmented vision to a more integrated and governor-led response. It is commendable, but the success of the strategy's implementation really depends on its timely operationalization. I think we are all aware about this issue. And operationalization, apart from being a complicated word to pronounce, also means concrete governance, financing, and coordination mechanisms, which is a big challenge, all right? So without this, all the transformative potential that the strategies itself has, because it's a great document, well written and well thought, could be wasted indeed. Nonetheless, we have to say that there are progresses and there are achievements, especially because of lots of work being resumed in the last months. So the main progresses and achievements are, on the one hand, on the side of the governance structure, because the interministerial committee, which is meant to oversee the implementation of this strategy, is active since March 2024, and the technical teams that are meant to support the coordination across ministries are active and are contributing and are meeting for the putting forward the implementation of the strategy. Indeed, on the side of the operationalization of the strategy, the technical units that are in charge of guiding the operationalization of the initiatives have resumed their works recently in mid-November. So the work has picked up again after some necessary break because of the escalation of conflict and aggression to Lebanon. And so right now the technical leads are, together with the support of UNICEF and ILO, of course, whom we work together very closely on this matter too, they have resumed the work on preparing some action plan for the upcoming future. While initially the social protection strategy had a horizon of 3 years, with the recent events and with the recent meetings, we have agreed on having a shorter horizon of perspective and to prepare a shorter implementation plan for 1 year. So this is what we expect to be released in the early weeks of January 2025, and we are working towards that with all the lead representatives of each ministries. Apart from these more operational matters, there are also initiatives that we are aware and that people can see that are underway. One of them is clearly what Peter has been talking about during his intervention, which is the National Disability Allowance Program, which is a program which has seen a lot of progress and a lot of changes and momentum in the past months and years. Together with that, also the pension reform, as you say, Sabine, our long-expected change. The law has been released, published, and then I will talk later on during this same reply about the initiative and expectation from this law. But let's say also that still about the National Social Protection Strategy, also work on the capacity of implementing agencies is underway. Also with cooperation with the IOF, Institute of Finance, and the UNICEF and colleagues, we are working on a social protection academy for the social protection actors in Lebanon for the objective and the outcome of capacitating at best all individuals in leading agencies to be the most capable possible to implement each of the initiatives that we are working on. So all these items or lines demonstrate some momentum. Nonetheless, challenges remain significant. In the short term, for the implementation, for the acceleration of the implementation of the strategy, we can think of 3 areas of work. One is that of establishing operational frameworks for the implementation of the strategy. What does it mean? It means having robust action plans and financial plans for each pillar and for each initiative. And together with that, which must be done at the beginning of the work, and that we expect for the beginning of January 2020, for end of January 2025, also monitoring and evaluation frameworks so that each lead agency, each implementing partner is also held accountable for the initiatives that has promised to commit to, all right? This is to ensure accountability of actors and to have a stronger governance framework. With that, also, the need to enhance the coordination mechanism, especially across ministries. So far, it was perceived that pillars were like pertaining to single agencies, single lead agencies in silos. What we are working on together with UNICEF is also that of facilitating bridges, facilitating communication across different agencies and ministries that have the duty to work together on several initiatives and pillars, such as health, labor activation, just to mention two of those. Finally, there are also the need to address immediate gaps across the sectors. For instance, there is a need, and Peter also mentioned this, to sustain and expand strategic initiatives in social assistance, but also to simultaneously focus on social insurance reforms, because we also look at the longer-term sustainability of the system with a vision of mixing contributory and non-contributory social protection in the country. Not to forget also to work on social health protection to avoid siloed and inequitable systems. Bottlenecks, as I said, remain: institutional weakness, fragmented coordination, unclear upcoming political scenario for 2025 also does not help, and unstable economic development, which we brings forward since the past, capacity gaps that we have been working on and will still be working on in the future, and why not also lack of trust and transparency towards the public. There are solutions we are thinking about. That is, we mentioned strengthening capacity through the Social Protection Academy, also to phase implementation, to prioritize high impact initiatives, such as we said, expanding coverage for the National Disability Allowance, mobilize resources. Peter mentioned one of the agencies, MOSA, being initially for the first time in a place to disburse payments to its people. So capacitating more domestic financing mobilization, but also with the support of us agencies, that of gathering international support to address the fiscal gaps that remain. To conclude, we'll say the strategy is a step towards sustainable and inclusive social protection in Lebanon, but we really need to work on prioritizing the implementation frameworks. And this is the primary priority for the January 2025, to improve coordination and to build trust towards the public. Great to have so many people in the public today that can hear this news from us. And then, if I may step to the second part of my reply on the pension reform, I'll try to be more concise, apologies. As you mentioned, Sabine, since 2023, the Lebanese parliament has approved the new pension law, long awaited, introducing the pension scheme for the old age after retirement age within the NSSF governance structure, okay? And this is a significant reform, groundbreaking, because Lebanon, until that point, was probably, together with Palestine, the only country in the region without an old age pension scheme, if I'm not wrong about that. Nonetheless, once the law is there, not everything is achieved, because the law in itself provides entitlements and provides some guidance, but also requires several implementation decrees and implementation steps, right? It is important that it becomes fully operational in a very short time. The ILO is working on it together with the partners, meaning NSSF, Ministry of Labor, and constituents. We can talk about that later on during this talk as well. And the focus has shifted to ensuring the sound implementation of the pension reform. The process is complex, but also promising for the country and for the partners. About next steps, very concrete ones that we expect to achieve, or we want to achieve in the short term, especially. One is that of activating an executive committee on the implementation of the law. So a committee that oversees this implementation, with representation from the Prime Minister's office, acting also as a secretariat, including the Ministry of Labor, the National Social Security Fund, and then workers and employers, of course. Second step is that of issuing the decree called Matrix of Qualifications for the new NSSF board. The new law requires NSSF to appoint a new board, a smaller board, with new members. And for appointing this board, the NSSF and the partners must produce this decree on qualifications that are required for people to be appointed to this NSSF board to be the most qualified as possible. Once the decree is in place, then step number 3 is that the call for election for the new NSSF boards. And there will be a need also to issue a decree for appointing these new members. So several steps, you see. And then more meat on the grill to ensure completion of data entry and closure of accounts for the NSSF, to facilitate the transition to the new old age system. This is a financial, digital, and accounting procedure, very delicate, but extremely necessary to ensure a smooth transition. With that, we also need to work on operational matters, such as that of implementing a new management information system, MIS, for the new pension scheme with the NSSF. This is crucial. For that, it is necessary to conduct a business process review analysis, capacitating us and the NSSF to prepare this new MIS. So to have analyzed the workflows to be able to produce the non-functional requirements of the management information system. Last, not least, is to prepare a draft law for the transition of the end of service indemnity system. So we have to transition from the end of service to the old age pension. This is not an automatic process, and it's a very delicate process, we understand right now, financially as well. This law, this transition must be based on consensus between the parts, between the tripartite constituents, especially between workers, employers, but also with the policy guidance and regulation from government. We need to work together, and ILO is there for supporting, of course, to find adequate solutions for the emerging issues of the past liabilities of the end of service indemnities. They have lost their values due to the financial crisis of the past years. I'm sure, Sabine, you are very aware of this. And the ultimate objective, I will probably talk about this later in other replies too, is that of try to restore as much as possible the adequacy of these benefits so as that they are meaningful to the people that they receive. But I stop here, and over to you, back to the facilitators. Thanks.
Thank you, Giulio, for summarizing two areas of work that are extremely, as you said, complex, but also to which we are looking forward to see progress being achieved. We know that change and reform in Lebanon is quite complex and lengthy, but these are two very, very important initiatives for I think all the Lebanese population. I'll address my third question to Peter. You both tapped a little bit on this, but I don't know if we can discuss it a bit further on the involvement of the international and donor community. We, from the outside, let's say, we had the impression that the international community responded quite quickly to the flash appeal that was published by the government and with all the partners. And also, we know that there were 800 million US dollars that were pledged at the Paris conference in support for Lebanon that took place in October. So, and part of it is for health, for education, and for protection. But beyond the numbers, how do you see, Peter, the role of the donors and the international NGOs in strengthening the social protection system in Lebanon and working with the government?
Okay, good. I'm going to be a bit shorter than my previous answer, so maybe we have some more time for some questions afterwards. So let's not keep our hopes up. I mean, these 800 million, let's be very frank, they pledged that in Paris, most of them were already committed and allocated to different programs. So we're not talking about fresh money, as we say here in Lebanon. These are money that were already there, already channeled. So the contribution of international donor, considering obviously the needs and the level of distraction has been very, very small. We hope that things will change. We hope that if politically the things get change from January, February, maybe this would trigger additional support, new support, though with the Syrian crisis, and a potential shift of resources from Lebanon to Syria, then might not be the case. Now, this is just to try to be a bit realistic on the real money that the country is having or may have in the future for the reconstruction. Now, development partners, I mean, especially donors, have played a very important role in social protection. If you think about the World Bank through the ESSN loan, but think about the European Union or the Netherlands. They are our main partner. When I say our, it's ILO and UNICEF. And through their investments, I mean, they are not the only donors. We also managed to have smaller donors. We've been able to achieve what I was saying before, which is government allocating its own resources and triggering a new interest and willingness to use government resources for the program that they supported in launching. The NDA was launched only with EU resources, but now, after 1.5 years, we see already government much more engaged and ready to invest also with money. So it's they've been very important into this process, and we really hope that they will not phased out in this moment of crisis. In theory, you may want to see there are several graphs that shows how domestic versus international support on social protection that show how one decline while the other increases. But this is not the right time. This is not the right moment. Maybe in the normal countries where that is not exposed to all these crises and all the destruction that we've seen, yes, I mean, you would do that. And maybe this was also the plan. I mean, if you look at the 2025 draft budget, the allocation to social grants is doubled compared to 2024. So there are 3 lines for social grants. In 2024 was 4.5, about 5 million. Now in the draft, it's which was, by the way, pre-escalation, pre-crisis, it was more than 9 million. So you already see an increase in investments of at least allocation from the government. But in this context, with this level of destruction, this is not going to be enough. Now, I hope that development partners, and here focusing more on donors, do step up their support, especially in the reconstruction. And what I usually say, people talk about rebuilding infrastructure, rebuilding houses. I always talk about rebuilding lives. It's not only about an apartment. It's also obviously about the roads and water and electricity infrastructure, but really it's about lives. And in rebuilding life means also rebuilding or building a social contract with the state, which hasn't been there for many years. That's why I think Lebanon is in the situation that we know, because there was a space not filled by the state and was filled by other groups. And social protection can play a role into these rebuilding lives. And if we still use the social protection strategy as the guiding principle, I mean, the guiding our Google map in this process, there are initiatives like the child grant that can be redesigned. There isn't a specific design in the strategy, but they can be adapted to support this process of rebuilding lives. And then from a recovery intervention, it can become a proper regular intervention at the core of the social assistance structure of the social protection. That's it from my side. Over to you, Sabine.
Thank you. I want to encourage our audience to ask questions. You can raise your hand, you can write in the chat box. So if anyone has a question, we can take like a round of questions before we continue. Anyone? I'll go on with my question, but please feel free to write your question in the chat box or to raise your hand.
Maybe we can encourage also people to write them in Arabic, and we can do the
Oh
translation.
yeah, no problem. Yes, of course. Feel free. We can even ask in Arabic, and we can translate. It's fine. No problem with that.
Maybe I have many questions actually, but I just wanted to give also the opportunity for others to ask theirs. My question concerns pension, and I think this is one. First of all, thank you to the two panelists. You were extremely clear, presenting very complex issues. And I think you also updated us on plenty of the information that we are not really updated on. And as a society, this trust that exists is also not being very much, if you want, tampered or at least reduced by a good communication about a subject that is so much painful to people. Because this fight for social equity, for pension, for protection, is a very long fight in this country. It has been going on for the probably past 50, 60 years or so. Anyway, my question is, to what extent the current, let's say, political and technical establishment, meaning government institutions, are already able and financially prepared to undertake this huge change? What are the specific challenges that you see from your point of view? And from the side of the private sector, because we have also the two sides. I mean, the system that is unequitable in the public sector, where some people have pensions and some do not. But we have also today the biggest share of the problem lies with the private sector, who is economically has been very much damaged. We've seen the InfoPro survey, and we know that it's going to be very difficult to ask from the private sector to actually make a step towards pension. So I rest my question, and I would like very much to hear your response on that.
Thanks, Lamia. I believe this is directed to me, although not directly, but I feel summoned. And yes, I agree. And I also share the concerns on the capacity of the landscape and also the concerns about the economic health of the private sector when it comes to tackling these difficult reforms. I must say that my direct experience in the country has been limited by my recent joining the ILO in Beirut, but from what I could see, from what I've been working with my technical team that are involved in the preparation of these technical studies for the pension reform, but also the end of service indemnity transition, the technical capacities are there. There is a capacity to understand and to observe and to forecast what changes mean, what the parametrical reform will entail, and where the burden will be. What at the stage at which we are now is that of engaging in strong social dialogue, is that of recognizing that a problem exists, and that, and maybe I will come back to this also during one of the last questions on tripartism, and the problem exists, and that there are three parties at the tables and that are involved. And all three parties have stakes in this issue, who have stakes into their economic health of the businesses and enterprises, who has stakes in the expectations of benefit and the adequacy of benefits, and then government, who has stakes in the health of the public finances, which finally entail or concern both workers, families, and enterprises and society as a whole. So all of these have point of views, sometimes conflicting, but when it comes to these huge problems that have these huge impacts on public finances, on people's life, on the economic life of the enterprises, then a solution must be found. And the way to find a solution is through the dialogue, through parties, and through finding a common ground and a compromise. And this is the way the ILO has always been working and trying to promote the work and achieving policy changes and achieving regulation in countries throughout the world. So my take on this, I know it's not much, Lamia, we can discuss further, is that of really promoting social dialogue as much as possible, because this is also how trust is created, because through dialogue, the others' sides' point of views are understood. It does not create barrages, correct? So this is also for what we were mentioning at the beginning of your question about the lack of trust because of a lack of knowledge. So the more we are capable of sharing information about consequences of potential reform options, of the economic scenarios that this entails, of the, let's say, forecasting and the simulations results. For as much as we are capable of understanding this, and for as much we are capable of sharing this information, the more we do it, the more we'll be capable of sitting on the table and to find a common solutions together. Over.
Thank you, Giulio. I have Mr. Abdullah Ramadan who raised his hand. تفضل.
Good afternoon, and thank you everyone for this wealthy session. I'm Abdullah, I'm a PhD candidate in the Lebanese University. I would like actually to add a note more than asking a question, and following what Mrs. Lamia has said. She's so right that we need to have a full package of a project and look on the financial and administrative part of the institutions that are taking the rule of this change of an era in Lebanon. But we should monitor another important part in this whole process. The Lebanese government actually was absent during the war and even previously, before the war and before everything. So we should actually appreciate all the initiatives and done by the international organizations and all the NGOs. But for the next level or in the future of Lebanon, we should really recognize that we need a new social contract, if we say, between the people and the government. We can't always rely on the help of the other international organizations or the funding or the external funding, we can call it. So if you see or if you witness what we have in Lebanon today, all the people, especially the people with disabilities and who need the full package of this social responsibility program, we're taking all the help and all the cash, if we can say, from the NGOs or from the parties, if we're not talking on a political side now. This actually leads to saying that the social contract is now pretty empty or nonsense between the Lebanese people and the government. It's totally absent. So we need a really good administrative and good funding for the government in the future to take its role again in the good right way.
Thank you. I think both our speakers tapped on the importance of having a new social contract redefined. So I'll take another question and we can have a round of answers. Ms. Diana Boughanem.
Hello, and thank you very much, Sabine. Thank you, Lamia. Thank you for both speakers for very interesting speeches and contributions. I'd like to ask, I'm not a social worker, I'm an engineer. I work in telecom. And it's very interesting since we are all living this war and we all live the social implications of what war has driven us to see among us. Especially we are living in Lebanon. We always have these all crises, and we must look into what we have, percussions of all of these wars. And what's interesting to me to know from both experts is that since the government, what is the system that you are dealing with, whether through the government, for example, the ministries of social affairs or other ministries, and the NGOs, and how do you see the difference between dealing with both these, the government from one side, the system in the government, and how successful it was in distributing all of these aids before and now during the war or during the past? And later on, whenever the NGOs came into life after the crisis, and where the trust in the government system was going, it was diminishing. So how do you, as international organization, how did you see the difference between dealing with government institutions against NGOs, knowing that NGOs are a result of political parties too? Because I know that so many political parties have been driving NGOs to grow and channeling money instead of through government institutions to their beneficiaries. They are channeling it now through NGOs. So how do you see that as experts? And thank you very much for your replies and your contribution to all of this. Thank you.
You wish to provide some elements of response?
Maybe I start with just maybe starting with the I think this last point from Diana. You also mentioned about trust, how it was before and after the crisis, and us as an international organization working with the government and so on. I mean, just for you to know, for quite a while, and many of us, many international organizations and donors as well, are prohibited to give money directly to the government. So quite a lot of things that we are doing, we are implemented directly. So even the cash, the NDA, the National Disability Allowance, which is a government program, and it's built around institution within the government, the payment process is done directly by us. So it doesn't go through the government. I hope that this will change at some point, because it's really at the core of a process of ownership of these kind of programs. I mean, we've been able to transfer many processes which do not require financial transactions, but there are others that do require transactions. We cannot transfer them now. So this has been a major change for the past, I think, 6 or 7 years, that we stopped basically supporting directly governments. On the other point on social contracts, please read to all. It's a beautiful read. The social protection strategy, it's a really beautiful read. I wasn't here when it was prepared. I was only in the final phase. And I was impressed on the principles that are at the core of the strategy, but also on the social contract. The word social contract, I think, is in the first paragraph of the strategy. It's actually one of the main objectives of the strategy is building a social contract. And even if it was external entities, UNICEF, ILO, really pushing for this principle, these have been accepted by the government, have been discussed and accepted. And some principle, some other elements, gender, for instance, I don't want to go much into the detail, the concept was not accepted, it was removed. It means that those that remained are accepted by the government. Now, so why this is important, because we see, and the government sees also, that the social protection is a key element in building a new social contract in Lebanon. Now, how do we assess progress towards building a social contract? I know that people often don't see the steps that the government is taking. We see it, and that's why sometimes I'm a bit positive, because I always compare. Any assessment has to be relative to a year before or 2 years before. What we have now, we didn't have it a year ago or 2 years ago. So when you start looking these signs, these proxies that show a change in how the government is trying to connect and to provide to its citizen, then you are more hopeful that maybe we are in the right direction of building a social contract. But I hear often, and I understand why this frustration and criticism. But let's start seeing these smaller proxies and compare to a year, 2 years ago, and then maybe everyone needs to contribute to this. It's not only about the government, let's be clear. We're talking about a contract. I mean, there are 2 parties, at least. I mean, there are multiple parties. So there is a huge role for the civil society to claim for their rights, to be there and advocate. So when someone mentioned about all the criticism, when my question is, okay, what are you doing about that? I haven't seen much happening from the other side of the contract. I've seen some key think tanks, including the Institute of Finance, TPI, for instance, really advocating and pushing. But how about the rest of the civil society? Over, Sabine.
Thank you. Do you wish to add anything, Giulio?
Thanks, Sabine. Yes, I can join the choir of Peter when he says that the National Social Protection Strategy is the paper, is the policy vision that can be seen as a document that testifies a sort of change towards having a social contract in the country. So I suggest to explore it and to see all the principles that are stated and the vision it has towards more inclusivity, transparency, accountability, and universality for social protection. Also, to respond to one of the questions in the chat box, which was asking whether fighting against corruption is directly included, not as a direct item, but the need for including more transparency and accountability of the system also is there. And then to pick up from this, perhaps the question from Diana about what is our experience in working with the government against NGO. And I agree with Peter, same experience from our end, that in several instances, for working with the government, we have to mediate through NGOs, because it is not possible for us to do direct budget support or government support in most cases. So the work with government and NGO is triangular, again, with their own partners, NGOs, and government, as tripartite, again, once more. But also what I could perceive in my experience in Lebanon and compare to several other countries is also a public administration and a system of civil servants which is under a lot of strain given the past crisis, the recent crisis. What I have observed since I arrived is that while the capacity may be there in terms of skills and knowledge and art skills of the people, but then understaffing and people covering multiple roles, and also, to be very blunt, lack of salary payments to civil servants are also challenges that we experience and that really affect the way we work with governments on a daily basis and throughout every initiative that we try to implement. Over to you, Sabine.
Thank you. Since we're talking about contract and not only social contract, part of the social contract also is, of course, the role of the private sector. And here, my question to you, Giulio. The ILO is the only tripartite UN agencies. It brings together government, representative of governments, employers, and workers. So also maybe going back a little bit to what Lamia was asking about, how do you see the role of the private sector in supporting or complementing government's effort in social protection. And I don't know if you also can tap, there's a question in the chat about the compensation of retirees and the reevaluation of the end of service indemnities. So also if we can tap a little bit on that, because I mean, it's both the responsibility of the government and of the private sector maybe to find a solution to this issue. And just Salam, I will go back to you in the just next round of questions, because she's raising her hand. So just
Okay.
I'll go back to you soon. Okay.
Okay, thanks, Sabine. Yes, I think we are getting back to a similar issue as we discussed before. And indeed, the ILO is a peculiar agency, a peculiar UN agency among the many agencies, because we have a tripartite governance, because our governing body in Geneva is made of governments, employers organizations, and workers organizations, and each of them represent different interests in the world of work. And the office, the work we do is that of trying to mediate all these interests through what we call social dialogue. So our structure emphasizes representativity and dialogue as the cornerstone for achieving the sustainable solutions, both technically but also politically, which must be driven by consensus as much as possible. So we try to aim at supporting the achievement of balance between interests. So to make it some example in the Lebanon context, the tripartite approach is very critical for advancing the social protection reforms, for them to be equitable and realistic, especially, but also sustainable. For the private sector also, which I would say refers to the employers organization, let's say, the private sector. A crucial example is indeed that of the end of service indemnity transformation and the transition to a pension scheme. This is a very delicate matter. This is also a very technical matter, which I cannot discuss in the detail of the technicalities of it. I can give you an overview, and then hopefully more and more information can also be released to the public through think tanks and newspapers, so that the public is aware of the different, more technical details that are part of this issue. But let's just to say that employers have a shared responsibility in this matter, because employers, alongside the government, will have to bear the cost of revalorization of past contributions. Past contributions that were made in the recent past throughout contributing on devalued salaries, okay? So what was accumulated in the recent past has lost its values, meaning that all the funds accumulated in the individual, let's call it individual accounts, has lost its values in terms of the benefit that will be distributed. So there is a need to agree on how to deal with these past 5 years of devalued contribution. This shared responsibility needs partnership and compromise between the parties. Compromise in a sense to find a common ground and to use social dialogue to balance between benefit adequacy for workers, those who will receive indemnities, and the economic health of enterprises, and the sustainability of public finances. So if you think of it, these three parties, all of them will lose something and will gain something. There will probably not be full compensation to workers. There will probably not be full revalorization. There will probably not be the request to enterprises to pay for the full revalorization, but for a part of it. And the government will probably not put the entirety of the funds from the government side. So a balance between these three interests must be found. And social dialogue is the way towards it. So in the future then, when the employer's contribution will be funding contributory pension, this will help modernizing the system and transition toward social insurance that can provide workers with security while maintaining also economic competitiveness of the enterprises. But to address this issue, there needs to be negotiations to avoid undue burdens, and with the aim of achieving the viability of the system, because we also don't want the system to collapse, and to demonstrate that social security is not affordable, is not adequate, and is not sustainable. We must push, we believe on that, we must push that for the idea that social security is affordable, adequate, and sustainable. And for doing that, we must, salvage the system. And yeah, so I can also continue on the role of private sector with other smaller elements. Perhaps I think there is also a need to work together also with government and workers again on the issue of declaration of salaries, because another key challenge for the social insurance or the contributory system is that of under declaration of wages, which is not an issue for a specific actor must be blamed. It is probably a systemic issue, and not a single person or actor is to be responsible for it. But let's just say that evidence says that salaries are regularly underreported, below the actual levels, for a common practice of reducing the wedge of contributions on the labor cost and on salaries, net salaries. So this, finally, even if we don't think always in these economic terms, but in the long term, this affects the benefit of workers and creates inequities within the systems, okay? So what we also aim and promote is that of working towards the introduction of more incentives for compliance, such as tax benefits, but also for introducing innovative inspection mechanism, such as simply cross-checking between agencies, declaration of salaries, such as Social Security Fund and the tax agencies. That is a first step to see whether there are some black flag, red flags to be that can notice some issues. So we believe that employers, workers, and government can collaborate to enforce this issue to promote more transparency and fairness. And finally, because I have been referencing to employers organization a lot, also I mentioned to workers organization, so I can be more tripartite as possible. We also believe that there is space to go beyond traditional forms of representation for workers organization. Workers organization in the world are at a crossroads, and they have the opportunity to expand their role towards representing more underrepresented groups and sectors. For example, the informal sector and emerging industries, such as digital platforms and gig economy. These are growing globally and in Lebanon, of course. We see it with our own eyes every day. These workers need protection, and workers' organization can extend their outreach and membership to this type of workers for more advocacy for inclusion in social protection scheme. So more members into the scheme also helps the sustainability of the schemes, of course. There are also vulnerable groups, women workers, young workers, migrant workers, who often lack formal representation and adequate protection. And again, workers' organization can take up the role of increased inclusivity and increased representation. And again, let's say, an invite to work organization to leverage social dialogue platforms to negotiate for more inclusive social protection policies, to raise awareness to their members of what is on the plate and how the strategy is looking forward to a social protection future in the country, to extend representation to ensure that these groups are not left behind and they can contribute and benefit from broader social and economic inclusivity. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you. Thank you. Very interesting indeed on many changes that we need to see taking place, not only, as you said, from the government side, but also from the employers and on the workers side as well. Ms. Salam Shrem, you had a question. Are you still with us? Yes.
Yeah. Hi,
Please go
Sabine.
ahead. Hi.
Actually, I think that you partially asked the question, but I'll try to frame it my way. So I wanted to inquire further about the coordination of the social protection in Lebanon from a statutory point of view. Because we know, I mean, at least I'm convinced based on my experience in the government that coordination is not one of our strongest points, let's say, despite some really good practices and like good initiatives here and there, just to be fair with everyone. But if we look at the mandates of the different line ministries when we speak about social protection, if we look at the organograms of the different line ministries, I don't think that we are able, or we can say that the division of labor, the division of roles and responsibilities among the different ministries is that clear. So my question to your guests is, do they have any prospects on how the coordination should be? And the question is not only based on the social protection strategy only, but also based on the response provided during this last war. So how, I mean, like the questions I have in mind, who should be leading the social protection coordination? Or maybe there should be like two co-leads. I mean, just if they can provide us with kind of vision, let's say, and whether they have, if they have any prospects on in this regard, did they suggested or presented to the government? And I mean, knowing the competition that could exist. Thank you.
I will leave it up to you to see who wants to reply.
So maybe let me start, and then I think Julia already mentioned this a bit. Salam, I think in his first answer. So let me
Yes.
start with the social protection aspect. Social protection, let's say, portfolio. The strategy suggests way of governance and coordination. There are a couple of models. Now, we have moved to a more simplified governance/coordination system, which has on top an interministerial committee led by the Prime Minister, but also with a central role of MOSA as well. And then there are going to be different committees based on pillar, including one that we actually been working on in the past few days with ILO. It's called the Social Assistance Committee, so to try to include all the different social assistance intervention that the government is working on. So there is a plan. There is in some cases, it's not really a plan. It's still there's still ideas. They will become a bit of a plan. There is a task team right now from different ministries that is working on trying to figure out all these details. But there will be a governance and coordination structure. Maybe not, it will not be in place at the same time across all pillars. We're going to probably start with a pillar one on social assistance, maybe reactivate a committee, I think, on the labor market as part of pillar 5 and so on. So there's still something that still needs to be ironed out, but there will be a governance and coordination structure on this. And it will be led by the most relevant ministry. For instance, the social assistance is MOSA. It's clearly MOSA. The social welfare, which is pillar 3 on the social protection strategy, is also MOSA. But there are other, there is not MOSA, is not the main player. So there's going to be either a co-lead or the leadership of another ministry. Still some details to be figured out. Now, on the coordination in the emergency response, I mean, we know that it was very political. At the start, there was a lot of tension that has had an impact on the response as well. I feel that right now things got a bit better. I've been in some meetings and I felt there was a good coordination and information sharing across the different stakeholders under the leadership of the Minister of Environment. Yeah, over to Giulio if you want to add anything.
No, please, Peter, I stand by what you just presented.
Thank you. Well, I have a question. Being, part of the Ministry of Finance, the big question is about the financial resources. A question maybe to the both of you, to have on your to tap a little bit on your ideas. But to give some elements, the ILO in one of its latest report estimated that Lebanon social protection financing gap would be equivalent to 9.4% of GDP. This means that Lebanon needs to increase its current spending on social protection by the equivalent of 9.4% of GDP, which is approximately 30% of government expenditure, with it's quite high. By doing that, we would eventually be able to universalize social protection. This means that every person could be covered by at least one social protection benefit. So working firsthand with government and knowing, of course, that today the resources are quite limited, do you see room for maneuvering, for mobilizing the needed resources, or for reallocating some spending?
Yeah, and maybe I can start here, Sabine. Thanks for the question. And as you said, 9%, 9 percentage points of GDP is a huge figure. And I think when you look at that, then you immediately realize that it needs prioritization. It needs to find how to close this gap bit by bit. It cannot be done in one day or overnight. And the way ahead, one of the way ahead, at least from when I gathered my thoughts on this question, you also mentioned it, Sabine, is the reallocation of social protection spending as well. We know that a large part of what is labeled as social protection spending in the country actually is, in a sense, inequitable and does not go through those more in needs, and actually is funding few systems. But, for example, the public sector pension system. Sorry about that. So this is probably one of the first big Pandora boxes to open and to work together with international partners, international financial institutions, to see which types of reform could and should be done to make it more sustainable in the long term. It is unrealistic to maintain a system which is so expensive for a country, unfortunately. So resources will need to be allocated, and possibly from our take, and also we can hear from Peter if we align, hopefully so, but is that to redirect spending from inefficient to and regressive programs towards more promising and promising programs and programs that maximize the impact, such as income support and healthcare access. We're thinking of that. And healthcare is also part of the social protection floor, 4 main pillars. And when we think of the allowances that we work on and what we are trying to envisaging for the future, such a child grant, also these are all social protection floor pillars that they have a huge impact for the population, and they tend to be progressive and effective, impactful measures. Another place where resources could be restructured, refurbished, reallocated is the space of the social health protection. The system is so fragmented that just by being so fragmented creates inefficiencies, because all these different systems, finally, they lose their bargaining power against the health suppliers, let's say. And if we were capable of achieving, not overnight for sure, but still under the vision of the social protection strategy, if we were able to achieve a less fragmented, a more unified health system, we would be able to negotiate better tariffs and to have a more efficient social protection system, which at the same time is also more inclusive and more equitable. And I hope that we agree in this room, otherwise we can further discuss, that social health protection is an equitable and inclusive way ahead, and that this trend of privatization of healthcare can actually cause additional strains for the most vulnerable population, and actually can finally cause catastrophic health expenditure also for those who are not immediately labeled as vulnerable, but they can be at any stage. So our vision is also that to promote a progressive universalism, Sometimes you hear agencies coming with the big flag of universalism, and one may feel that must be implemented overnight or in one day, that everybody must be covered by social protection in 2025. What we work together with our partners in MOSA and UNICEF is that of achieving it step by step. And Peter already has mentioned the planning for 2025 for the National Disability Allowance, and now we're thinking of expanding social grants incrementally. So over to Peter for complementing it, or over to Sabine for concluding.
Giulio mentioned all the key words and the key points about gradual and progressive. This is it's really important, and not to just we will be delusional if we would expect that in a year time there will be resources to cover everyone and with the right amount of support and so on. Well, just one aspect that maybe I think it's important to add in the mix, which is about taxation. It is not necessarily about new taxes, but it's about being able. We need a state. Lebanon needs to be a state and need to have an administration to manage and to implement the taxes that they have. That are in place. People are not paying taxes, and unless we fix that, this is the other side of. Remember the contract. It's not one way. It's two or more. That's how the contract works from people. It's about paying taxes, and the state that can really hold people accountable. Then it can also include new taxes if we feel that the taxation system is inequitable and that we need to target more large businesses or large polluters and so on. So it's really important to increase the revenue, which, by the way, the Ministry of Finance now do not know how much they are making from taxes. They have, it has been more than 2 years, I think, that they are not entering tax data in the system. So they have no idea. They state in the budget that the revenue will be 3 or 4 billion, but they don't know. So it's really a guesstimate. They're trying to fix it. Okay, this is also good that they've realized it and they're trying to fix it. But that's central. That's central to financing social protection, financing services in general, not necessarily only the social protection intervention. Over Sabine.
Thank you. I agree personally with mostly what you said. We're a little bit past 5. We had set at 5. So I just want to ask the audience if somebody would like to ask another question before we wrap up. No. Peter and Giulio would like to say any last words.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure to be here, to be invited as well.
Thanks everybody for listening to me. Thanks, Peter, for the chat.
Well, allow me to thank you both. I think we tapped on a lot of very interesting points and very challenging points that we will have to face in the future. I think each of these points may need a webinar on its own to dive more in depth into, the complexities of what it entails. However, for me, and I think for the audience, it was very enlightening because you shed light first on positive initiatives that were done during the war, on progress that was achieved also and that we were not really aware of. And also, thank you for highlighting, let's say, the approach to reform that is hand in hand with the government, strengthening the capacities of the government and being real partners to the government institution in helping them conduct their mission, let's say, in the most appropriate way, despite a lot of challenges. We at the Institute will remain very engaged on at least looking at the financing side of social policy, and I'm sure we will have a lot to do in the coming months and years. So thank you again, both. for this very enlightening discussion. And we hope to see you again very soon. Thank you, everyone, also for your question and for being there with us and for your interest. And we'll hope also to see you soon in our upcoming webinars. Thank you, everyone, and have a nice evening.
Thank you. Bye.